The Galactic Council built a weapon they claimed couldn't be hacked. 7 layers of security that blended biology, quantum physics, and temporal paradoxes. They said breaking in would require the universe to contradict itself. But when Commander Blackridge arrived late with his coffee, he just smiled and asked for a keyboard. The Nexus Prime's main chamber was exactly the sort of place galactic governments build when they want you to feel small. Polished obsidian floors reflected constellations of holographic schematics, while crystalline beings refracted light in showy, impractical ways. High Arbiter Quinidal's form glittered as if designed by a committee that valued spectacle over subtlety. They gestured toward a shimmering core suspended at the room's center, the quantum Aegis defense matrix. It hummed with the quiet arrogance of something that had never known failure. Representatives from 12 species watched with the rigid posture of those trying not to seem impressed. This wasn't just another weapon. The Council had fused biological authentication with quantum encryption, temporal algorithms, and something they called psychic resonance shielding. They called it the pinnacle of defensive technology, a system so advanced that breaching it would require rewriting the laws of physics. The air was thick with the smug satisfaction of bureaucrats who believe they've built the final answer to a very old question. Admiral Kai Renan stood slightly apart, her posture relaxed in a way that felt almost subversive. She watched Quinidal's presentation with the detached focus of someone counting cards at a high-stakes table. Every boast, every flicker of holographic demonstration, every nod from the assembled dignitaries, she absorbed it all without reaction. You got the sense she wasn't just listening to what they said, but why they said it. The Council wasn't just showcasing a weapon. They were staging a power play, and the audience was meant to leave feeling outclassed. They called the Aegis the end of the hacking arms race. A system that learned, adapted, and preempted intrusion attempts across multiple dimensions. Previous security models were labeled obsolete, like ancient locks on a bank vault. The presentation went beyond technical specs. It was a performance, a carefully curated display of superiority meant to cement the Council's authority. They'd gathered the galaxy's most powerful species not to collaborate, but to intimidate. What they hadn't accounted for was the human tendency to treat absolutes as personal challenges. Admiral Renan's calm wasn't defeatism. It was the quiet of a strategist recognizing that overconfidence often digs its own traps. The stage wasn't just set for a demonstration, it was set for a collision between flawless engineering and flawed, unpredictable ingenuity. They'd built a system to withstand every known form of attack. They just never considered what might happen if someone brought a new one. The Council's defensive layout came across less like architecture and more like aggressive philosophy. They'd arranged 7 layers of security in a sequence that seemed designed to humble any potential intruder. Each tier blended disciplines most civilizations kept carefully separate. Quantum mechanics with cellular biology, temporal theory with psychic resonance. They presented this not as a collection of parts but as an unbroken chain of reasoning. The message was clear. Breaching this system wasn't a technical challenge, it was an intellectual surrender. First came the bioneural authentication. It didn't just scan genetic markers. It verified them against quantum-entangled echoes in real time. Your DNA had to match not only in structure, but in vibrational frequency across parallel states of existence. The system compared your biological signature against what it called your quantum self in adjacent dimensions. Miss by one harmonic resonance and the lock stayed sealed. It was like requiring a fingerprint and the soul it belonged to. Encryption formed the second barrier, built on constants that only existed in specific dimensional frameworks. The keys weren't mathematical in any conventional sense. They drew from physical laws that operated solely in universes where light bent backward or time ran in loops. You couldn't solve these equations without access to realities where the rules of math themselves were different. It was the kind of security that made brute force decryption not just difficult, but conceptually meaningless. Layer 3 introduced the Guardians, sentient AIs woven into the system's core. They didn't just monitor for intrusions. They learned from them, adapted in real time, and developed what the engineers called suspicion-tingled protectiveness. They could anticipate attack patterns before they fully formed, reacting not to code, but to intent. Their programming included something akin to institutional paranoia, a constant low-grade certainty that everyone was out to get them. Temporal paradox algorithms created the fourth tier. These didn't just block unauthorized access. They unraveled it backward through time. Any attempt to breach the system would be met with countermeasures that reached into the past to prevent the intrusion from ever being conceived. The defense didn't stop you from hacking, it stopped you from wanting to. Or worse, made it so you never had the idea in the first place. Psychic barriers formed the fifth measure, designed to sense hostile intent at the subconscious level. They didn't just read surface thoughts. They monitored emotional resonance, psychological patterns, even the subtle bioelectric flickers of deception. Approach the system with concealed motives and it would know before you did. The perfect lie detector if the lie was about to turn into action. Quantum entanglement fields made up the sixth layer, enforcing a simple but absolute rule. Unauthorized code could not exist within the system's operational space. It wasn't that the code would be deleted. It was that the fundamental properties of the quantum field would prevent it from being written, transmitted, or executed. The environment itself rejected foreign instructions, like an immune system attacking unrecognized cells. The seventh and final layer was pure mathematical theater. Protocols based on theorems that couldn't be solved without creating logical paradoxes. The kind of problems that cause supercomputers to enter infinite loops or shut down to avoid ontological errors. The council called it elegant impossibility. Security so absolute that defeating it would require the universe to briefly suspend its own rules. They'd built a lock that could only be picked by reality itself, admitting a mistake. The doors hissed open not with the expected military precision, but with the casual air of someone who'd just finished a decent breakfast. Commander Holden Blackridge stepped through carrying a thermal mug, his uniform looking less like armor and more like a comfortable suggestion. He moved with the unbothered confidence of a man who'd taken the scenic route to his own trial. His smile was dry, almost conversational, as if he'd just heard a mildly amusing joke on his way in. He arrived 20 minutes after the council had finished marveling at their own achievement. The timing felt deliberate, like a comedian letting the applause die down before delivering the punchline. His entrance cut through the chamber's solemnity like a window opened in a stuffy boardroom. You could see the discomfort ripple through the assembled dignitaries. This wasn't how things were done. Protocol demanded reverence, not caffeine. He took a slow sip from his mug before speaking. "Never start a diplomatic engagement without proper coffee," he remarked as if sharing a universal truth. "Actually, never start anything without it. Life's too short for bad caffeine." The statement hung in the air, a piece of folk wisdom dropped into a symposium on quantum theory. It was his opening philosophical position, delivered not as defiance but as simple fact. The council's engineers watched him with the cautious curiosity of scientists observing an unpredictable species. They'd expected a human technician, someone bristling with gear, maybe trailing cables or humming with prototype energy. Instead, they got a man who seemed more concerned with his beverage temperature than their multi-dimensional security array. His relaxed posture suggested either profound ignorance or deep strategy. There was no middle ground. When Quinadal asked if humanity felt prepared to address their technological marvel, Blackridge just shrugged. "We're not exactly the galaxy's tech leaders," he admitted easily. "You folks build symphonies. We're still figuring out how to play the kazoo." The humility felt tactical. He wasn't dismissing their achievement. He was reframing the entire contest. They'd built a fortress. He'd brought a lockpick and a curious expression. Admiral Rennan watched from the sidelines, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. She understood what the council missed. Blackridge wasn't assessing their technology. He was assessing them. The way their crystalline forms tightened when challenged, the slight flicker in their holographic displays when he mentioned coffee instead of code. He was studying the architects, not the architecture. He approached the shimmering core of the quantum aegis not with reverence, but with the focused interest of someone examining an interesting engine problem. His fingers didn't twitch toward tools or interfaces. He just looked, his head slightly tilted as if trying to understand not how it worked, but why they'd built it that way. The weapon wasn't a sacred object to him. It was a conversation starter. The council had prepared for a technical challenge. They'd armored against code attacks, genetic forgeries, even temporal incursions. 但他们没有准备好迎接一个带着咖啡杯和好奇微笑的人. Blackridge's calm felt less like confidence and more like a different way of thinking entirely. Where they saw perfection, he saw interesting flaws. Where they saw absolutes, he saw negotiating points. This wasn't the confrontation they'd staged. This was something new, a collision between certainty and curiosity, between finished answers and open questions. The human hadn't come to break their system. He'd come to understand it, and in that understanding perhaps to find something they'd all missed. The council had just finished their grand tour of hypothetical vulnerabilities when Blackridge leaned forward, his coffee mug clicking softly against the obsidian railing. He waded through the polite applause, the self-congratulatory nods, the murmured admiration from species who understood they were witnessing something beyond their own capabilities. The moment felt choreographed, right down to the final holographic flourish that spelled impenetrable in 17 ceremonial languages. Then he spoke. Every known form of cyber attack, he repeated, his tone conversational, almost offhand. That's what you tested against? Quinidal's crystalline structure shifted slightly, facets realigning with the subtle irritation of a professor interrupted during a well-rehearsed lecture. Of course, we accounted for 18,000 documented intrusion methodologies across 7 technological epochs. The answer came polished, perfect, and utterly prepared. Blackridge took another sip of coffee. What about unknown forms? The question hung in the air, simple and blunt, like a stone dropped into a perfectly still pond. The chamber's ambient hum seemed to falter for half a second. You could see the dignitaries processing the words, turning them over as if checking for hidden meanings. The query was so elementary it felt almost childish. Or revolutionary. Quinidal's light patterns flickered in something akin to confusion. Unknown forms? The concept is illogical. One cannot test against what has not been conceived. Technar Blix, the head engineer, adjusted his interface collar with a nervous click. Our predictive algorithms account for theoretical future developments based on extrapolated. He trailed off, realizing he was defending a position that didn't need defense. Or did it? The human commander didn't press. He just watched them, his expression neutral, as if he'd asked about the weather and received a lecture on atmospheric science. So you can't test against something you don't know exists, he summarized, not as an accusation but as a simple observation. The admission settled over the room like fine dust. They'd built a fortress against every sword ever forged, never considering someone might bring a pen instead. This was the crack in their perfect armor, not a flaw in the code, not a weakness in the quantum encryption, but a blind spot in their philosophy. They'd prepared for evolution, not revolution. For improved tactics, not entirely new languages of attack. Their system could learn and adapt to anything it recognized as a threat. But it had no capacity for surprise, no instinct for the genuinely new. Blackridge had reframed hacking not as a technical challenge, but as a creative one. The game wasn't about breaking rules. It was about inventing new ones. Where they saw a finished equation, he saw a blank page. Their security was a museum of all possible pasts. He was talking about a future they hadn't imagined yet. The council's confidence began to feel less like strength and more like rigidity. They'd constructed a system that could withstand any storm from any direction on the map. They just never considered someone might dig a tunnel, or simply ask the door to open. The human hadn't challenged their technology. He'd challenged their imagination. This moment shifted everything. The contest was no longer about matching their technical prowess. It was about introducing a variable they hadn't factored. A test wouldn't prove their system weak. It would prove that strength alone wasn't enough. They'd built the perfect answer to yesterday's questions. He was suggesting they might not be asking the right ones today. The seed was planted, not in their systems but in their minds. The idea that security might be less about building higher walls and more about understanding what lay beyond them. That sometimes the greatest threat isn't what you expect but what you never see coming. They'd prepared for a siege. He was proposing a conversation. Admiral Renan watched the subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The human's question had landed not as a challenge but as an invitation, one she decided to accept on behalf of her species. She stepped forward, her uniform crisp against the shimmering alien architecture. If the council is so confident, she began, her voice measured, perhaps we might propose a practical demonstration. The offer hung in the air, a diplomatic maneuver disguised as a simple suggestion. She outlined the terms with the precision of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. Humanity would attempt to breach the quantum aegis matrix. They would have 24 standard hours, Success meant a permanent seat on the Galactic Council's diplomatic board. Failure meant acknowledging the Council's technological supremacy in perpetuity. The stakes were both simple and immense, a chance to rewrite humanity's place in the galactic order, or confirm their status as second-tier thinkers. Quinadal's crystalline form seemed to harden slightly, facets aligning into something more rigid. "Very well, Commander Blackridge," the High Arbiter replied, the words carrying the weight of formal ceremony layered over quiet menace. "We accept your challenge." The phrase echoed through the chamber, less an invitation and more a sentencing. You could feel the shift from theoretical debate to operational reality. This was no longer about ideas. It was about execution. The rules were clarified with bureaucratic thoroughness. Blackridge would have access to a standard terminal linked to the system's outermost security layer. He could use any method he chose provided it involved no physical tampering with the hardware. Most importantly, if he reached the weapon's control core, he could do whatever he wished with it. Fire it, reprogram it, or, as someone added with a trace of sarcasm, paint it pink. The concession felt like a joke until you realized it was a trap. They couldn't imagine him succeeding, so the consequences seemed irrelevant. The countdown began not with a dramatic signal, but with the quiet activation of monitoring systems. Holographic timers appeared around the chamber, displaying the remaining hours in cool, precise numerals. The tension became something tangible, a focused anticipation that tightened shoulders and quieted chatter. This was no longer a philosophical debate. It was a race against a clock that measured more than time. It measured credibility. But beneath the technical framework, the test remained a social experiment. Renan hadn't just proposed a hack. She'd forced the Council to publicly stake their reputation on a system they claimed was perfect. They'd built this moment themselves. The ceremony, the audience, the boasts, and now they had to live with the consequences. The human commander wasn't just testing security protocols. He was testing their confidence, their pride, their willingness to bet everything on their own certainty. Blackridge accepted the terms with a nod, his expression unchanged. He didn't look like someone preparing for a grueling technical marathon. He looked like a man considering an interesting puzzle over a cup of coffee. The Council saw a binary outcome, victory or defeat. He seemed to see something else entirely, a conversation, an exploration, a chance to understand not just how their system worked, but how they thought it worked. The stage was set for what should have been a spectacular failure. 7 layers of impossible security against one human with a terminal, and 24 hours. The Council's engineers already looked bored, as if watching someone attempt to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. But Renan watched Blackridge and she saw something they missed. Not determination, not anxiety, but curiosity. The kind of curiosity that doesn't see barriers, only questions. This wasn't going to be a technical assault. It was going to be a performance, an improvisation with the highest possible stakes. They'd given him a keyboard and a countdown. They thought they'd defined the game. They didn't realize he was playing a different one entirely. The testing room felt like the kind of sterile environment designed by committees that value oversight over insight. Harsh lighting reflected off polished surfaces, every angle calculated to suggest control and observation. A single terminal stood at the center, its interface glowing with the soft blue light of Council standard design. This was the gateway to the quantum Aegis matrix, reduced to a keyboard and screen that wouldn't look out of place in a mid-level administrative office. The contrast was almost comical. Access to the galaxy's most advanced security system through what looked like a standard data entry station. Monitors lined the walls displaying real-time analysis of every keystroke, every data packet, every microsecond of system interaction. Alien technicians watched streams of code with the bored confidence of security guards monitoring an empty vault. They'd seen this before. Everyone who attempted this started the same way, typing furiously, running scripts, probing for weaknesses. The displays were there less for monitoring and more for demonstration. A way to show the human how thoroughly his failure would be documented. Someone had provided a comfortable chair and a fresh pot of coffee. The gesture felt like a concession dripping with sarcasm, like offering a cushion to someone about to be executed. The chair was too plush, the coffee too aromatic. Little touches meant to highlight the absurdity of his attempt. They were making him comfortable while waiting for his inevitable humiliation. The theater of it all was almost impressive in its pettiness. Quinadal approached for the final confirmation. You understand the terms, Commander? 24 hours to breach our security. Any method that does not involve physical interference. Blackridge nodded, his fingers already resting lightly on the keyboard. I have 24 hours to breach your security and gain access, he repeated, his tone flat, almost bored. The words sounded less like a challenge and more like reading from an instruction manual. He didn't seem excited or nervous, just present. The alien's confidence was absolute, but it had developed a hairline fracture. The human's calm was unsettling. They'd expected bluster or determination, or at least some display of technical preparation. Instead, he looked like someone about to check his messages. Their certainty began to feel less like confidence and more like hope. They needed him to fail in the way they expected. Anything else would be inconvenient. When they asked if he required any specialized equipment, any interface tools or computational aids, he just shook his head. Just the keyboard, he said. The request was so modest it felt like parody. They'd prepared for technological warfare. He'd brought literacy. The humility of their expectations crystallized in that moment. They'd imagined sophisticated attack vectors, multi-dimensional code breaches, temporal incursions. He'd asked for letters and numbers arranged in a familiar pattern. This was the fundamental miscalculation. The Council assumed advanced problems required advanced solutions. They'd built their defenses against imagined futures of increasingly complex technology. They never considered that someone might approach their perfect system with the digital equivalent of a paperclip and a curious expression. Earth's reputation for low-tech, high-creativity problem-solving wasn't a weakness. It was a different language entirely. The stage was set for something they hadn't prepared for. Not a technical assault, but a psychological one. The real vulnerability wasn't in their code or their quantum fields or their temporal algorithms. It was in their minds, in their assumptions, in their absolute certainty that everyone played by the same rules. Blackridge settled into the too comfortable chair, adjusted the keyboard and looked at the screen not as a barrier but as a conversation partner. The countdown began. He started typing, not code, just words. The first hours unfolded with the quiet predictability of a failed experiment. The monitoring displays flickered with streams of rejection notices. Each authentication attempt met with the same elegant dismissal. The bio-neural locks alone registered over 3,000 failed entries, a number that scrolled past with the indifference of a machine counting raindrops. To the Council engineers, it looked like primitive brute forcing, the digital equivalent of throwing rocks at a fortress wall. They noted the attempts with professional detachment, occasionally exchanging glances that conveyed silent amusement. The human was playing exactly by their script. What they didn't notice was where Commander Blackridge's attention actually rested. His eyes tracked across the holographic displays monitoring the room itself, the real-time biosigns of the observers, the subtle shifts in posture among the different species, the way Quinadal's crystalline form refracted light slightly differently when annoyed versus impatient. He noted which engineers checked their personal devices during lulls, which representatives whispered to aides, which security officers stood just a little too rigidly. The terminal was his prop. The audience was his target. Admiral Renan watched from her position near the observation rail, her expression neutral, but her understanding deepening with each passing minute. She recognized the pattern not as failure, but as reconnaissance. The failed login attempts were noise, a predictable performance meant to reassure the observers. The real work was happening in the spaces between keystrokes, in the casual glances around the chamber, in the way Blackridge would occasionally stretch and make eye contact with different council members, as if sharing a silent joke about the tedium of security protocols. He wasn't hacking the system, he was hacking the room. His demeanor remained frustratingly casual for someone supposedly engaged in a high-stakes technical challenge. He'd paused to sip his coffee, his eyes scanning the holographic displays showing the observers' vital signs and attention metrics. He noted when Technar Blix looked bored versus alert, when Quinadal's light patterns indicated focus versus distraction. He was building a map not of code pathways but of human or alien behavior patterns. The terminal served as cover for the real mission, psychological profiling under the guise of technical struggle. The Council's monitoring systems were designed to track digital attacks, not social ones. They recorded every keystroke, every packet, every nanosecond of processing time, but they had no metrics for measured pauses, for strategic eye contact, for the subtle shifting of weight that indicated a representative losing interest. Their perfect security system could detect a quantum-level intrusion attempt from another dimension, but it couldn't measure the slow building of rapport with a bored security technician. Blackridge's occasional questions to the observers felt like casual chatter, attempts to break the monotony. He'd ask about shift rotations, about favorite interface designs, about whether the coffee on their homeworlds measured up to Earth standards. The conversation seemed innocuous, the kind of filler talk that happens during long technical procedures. But each exchange yielded another piece of the puzzle, another insight into how these beings thought, what they valued, how they responded to different types of communication. The alien saw a primitive technician failing gloriously at a task beyond his capabilities. Admiral Renan saw a sociologist conducting fieldwork in real time. The supposed attack on their security system was actually a gathering operation, collecting the raw data of behavior and response. Every rejected password attempt, every failed biometric scan, every dismissed encryption key, they were all just gestures in a larger performance designed to make the observers reveal themselves. By the fourth hour, Blackridge had compiled more useful intelligence about the Council's security psychology than he could have gained from a year of studying their technical manuals. He knew which engineers took pride in their work versus which followed procedure blindly. He knew which representatives valued efficiency over thoroughness, which preferred protocol over improvisation. He knew whose pride could be manipulated, whose patience could be tested, whose authority could be borrowed. The human appeared to be mastering nothing but failure. In reality, he was mastering them. Around the fourth hour, Blackridge stopped typing and looked up from the terminal. The stream of failed authentication attempts paused. He turned toward the observation gallery where the Council engineers stood monitoring his progress or lack thereof. "These power couplings," he began, his tone conversational, almost technical. "Do they use trilithium matrices for resonance stabilization?" The question hung in the air, precise and unexpectedly informed. It wasn't the sort of thing a primitive species was supposed to know. Technar Blick straightened slightly, his interface collar emitting a soft click of surprise. The human wasn't supposed to understand their engineering terminology, much less use it correctly. "We moved beyond trilithium system cycles ago," he replied, his voice carrying the faint pride of someone explaining superior technology to a curious child. "The Aegis uses quintessential resonance chambers." He gestured toward the holographic display where intricate energy patterns pulsed in harmonious rhythms. They tapped directly into zero-point energy fluctuations. Theoretically unlimited power, perfectly stable. Blackridge nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Self-sustaining," he said, not as a question but as confirmation. "The system powers its own security. Elegant." The compliment sounded genuine, not fawning. He leaned forward, his eyes tracking the energy flows on the display. "And the harmonic alignment, is that maintained through dimensional phase locking or does it use predictive oscillation?" The technical specificity was disarming. This wasn't the frustrated fumbling they'd expected. This was a colleague discussing engineering nuances. The Council engineers found themselves explaining their system's workings in detail, caught off guard by the humans' apparent understanding. They described the resonance chambers, the energy conversion processes, the fail-safes built into every subsystem. Blackridge listened intently, occasionally asking follow-up questions that showed he wasn't just repeating terms. He understood the concepts. "So the encryption draws power from the same source," he observed. "The security isn't layered onto the system. It's woven into its fundamental operation." This was the shift they hadn't anticipated. The human wasn't trying to disprove their technology or find flaws in their logic. He was learning their language, their patterns of thought, their engineering philosophy. When he spoke of the resonance of eternal truth in their security protocols, he wasn't mocking their terminology. He was using it with what sounded like genuine appreciation. He discussed the harmony of perfect understanding, not as poetry, but as technical description. The conversation became a bridge between cultures built on mutual technical appreciation. The engineers, initially wary, began explaining more complex aspects of the system, pleased to have someone who seemed to understand their work on its own terms. They described the temporal synchronization processes, the quantum entanglement fields, the biological interface protocols. Black Ridge absorbed it all, his questions becoming more insightful, more precise. He wasn't gathering attack vectors. He was understanding their architecture from the inside. This was the real work of the fourth hour. Not typing commands into a terminal, but building rapport through shared technical language. The human was demonstrating that he could think like them, speak like them, understand their systems on their terms. It made the engineers lower their guard. It made them see him not as a threat, but as a curious student of their superior technology. They forgot that understanding a system is the first step toward subverting it. By the time the conversation wound down, Black Ridge had gained more than technical specifications. He'd gained insight into how these engineers thought, what they valued, how they structured their arguments. He knew which concepts they considered fundamental, which they saw as elegant solutions, which they defended with particular pride. He hadn't hacked their system. He'd hacked their minds, and they'd helped him do it. The silence in the observation chamber had settled into that particular brand of bureaucratic ennui that comes from watching failure in high definition. Technicians monitored scrolling rejection notices with the practiced boredom of toll collectors on an empty highway. Then a soft, insistent beeping cut through the hum. It wasn't an alarm, just a cheerful rhythmic pulse from Commander Black Ridge's thermal coffee mug. The response was instantaneous and catastrophic. Crimson lighting bathed the chamber as primary security protocols engaged. Energy shields phased into existence around key consoles with a resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor plates. Holographic displays shifted from monitoring streams to tactical threat assessments, their calm blue interfaces replaced by aggressive crimson warnings. Automated defense turrets descended from ceiling panels, their targeting arrays scanning the room with frantic precision. The system had detected an unauthorized transmission. It didn't care that the source was a beverage container. Black Ridge watched the chaos unfold with the calm of someone who'd accidentally set off a car alarm. He raised a hand slowly. "My apologies," he said, his voice cutting through the klaxons. "Coffee temperature alert." He tapped the side of his mug, silencing the beep. The statement hung in the air, absurd and perfect. The shields remained raised. The turrets continued their scanning patterns. The alarm lights pulsed on. The system wasn't designed to recognize all clear signals from human drinkware. "Things programmed to let me know when the brew's getting cold," he explained, as if describing a perfectly reasonable feature. The council engineers stared, their professional composure fraying at the edges. Their perfect security system had just been triggered by a kitchen appliance. The moment revealed something fundamental about automated defenses. They react to signals, not context. A beep was a beep, whether it came from a hostile drone or a cooling beverage. In those few seconds of chaos, Black Ridge gained more useful intelligence than in the previous 4 hours of typing. He saw how their crisis protocols functioned under stress, which systems prioritized physical security over data integrity, which engineers reached for manual overrides versus waiting for automated responses, how quickly fear overrode logic in even the most advanced civilizations. The incident was a window into their operational psychology, and they'd thrown it open themselves. The embarrassment was palpable. Quinadal's crystalline form flickered with what could only be described as flustered agitation. Technar Blix hurriedly entered commands to stand down the security systems, his movements unusually abrupt. Their perfect system had been humiliated by something as primitive as a temperature sensor. In their haste to explain the overreaction, they revealed a critical detail. All personal devices, even those brought by visitors, were automatically integrated into the ship's security network. A standard protocol, they explained, for monitoring potential threats. This was the vulnerability Black Ridge had been waiting for. Their security wasn't just layered, it was interconnected to the point of paranoia. The same network that monitored weapon systems also watched coffee mugs. The same protocols that guarded quantum encryption also tracked beverage temperatures. They'd built a fortress where every window, every door, every crack was wired to the same alarm system, and they'd just shown him where the control panel was hidden. The resolution wasn't in the stand-down order or the awkward reactivation of monitoring displays. It was in the silent realization that passed through the room. Their absolute security depended on perfect discrimination between threat and non-threat, and they'd just demonstrated they couldn't tell the difference. The human hadn't found a flaw in their code. He'd found a flaw in their philosophy. Sometimes the strongest lock can be opened by the smallest, most unexpected key. even if that key is just a beeping coffee cup. While the Council's engineers watched streams of failed authentication attempts scroll past their monitors, Commander Blackridge was conducting a different kind of analysis entirely. His apparent focus on the terminal was a carefully maintained performance, a screen behind which he mapped the psychological terrain of everyone in the chamber. He noted communication patterns, cultural tics, the subtle ways different species expressed pride, impatience, or boredom. Each representative became a data point in a rapidly expanding profile of institutional behavior. Queen Adal emerged as a creature of ceremony and protocol. The crystalline being valued precision in language and posture, in the exact sequencing of security demonstrations. His reactions to deviations from expected procedure were immediate and telling. A slight hardening of his form, a shift in light refraction patterns that signaled discomfort. He cared more about the appearance of control than its practical application. For him, the system's perfection was as much about symbolism as security. Teknar Blix presented as the classic engineer, his pride rooted in technical elegance rather than practical outcomes. He took visible satisfaction in explaining complex systems, his interface collar clicking with enthusiasm when discussing quantum resonance or temporal algorithms. His vulnerability lay in his belief that beautiful engineering equaled perfect security. He would defend the system's theoretical purity long after its practical weaknesses became apparent. For him, the math had to be beautiful, and beauty meant it must be right. The other representatives formed a gallery of bureaucratic personalities. The Vola delegate showed patterns of rigid obedience to chain of command, never questioning authority even when logic suggested hesitation. The Xylosian representative displayed almost reflexive deference to procedure, treating established protocols as moral imperatives rather than practical tools. The Grand Ambassador valued consensus above all, her bioluminescent patterns shifting toward agreement whenever the majority opinion solidified. These profiles revealed predictable response patterns to different types of stimuli. Queen Adal would comply immediately with any request framed as a ceremonial necessity or upholding protocol. Teknar Blix would respond eagerly to technical challenges or opportunities to demonstrate system capabilities. The others would follow authoritative commands without question, especially if presented with urgency or the suggestion of collective agreement. Black Ridge identified which aliens would bypass their own security protocols if presented with the right psychological trigger. Queen Adal's pride in procedure meant he would authenticate a false security update if it appeared to come through proper channels. Teknar Blix's engineering arrogance made him susceptible to technical emergencies that challenged his system's capabilities. The others would comply with almost any directive that carried the scent of official authority or imminent crisis. The human transformed their greatest strengths into exploitable weaknesses. Their pride in the system became a lever he could pull. Their commitment to protocol became a box he could check. Their respect for authority became a uniform he could borrow. He didn't need to break their encryption when he could simply convince them to open the door themselves. By the 6th hour, Black Ridge possessed something far more valuable than a password or a backdoor. He held the psychological keys to every person monitoring his supposed failure. He knew which buttons to push, which fears to trigger, which pride points to massage. The terminal remained unused for stretches of time as he simply watched, cataloged, and calculated. The real work wasn't happening on the screen. It was happening in the space between expectation and behavior, between protocol and personality. He now understood that the most impenetrable security system in the galaxy was operated by beings with perfectly predictable psychological patterns. Their technology was flawless. Their minds were not, and sometimes all you need to open a locked door is understanding the person holding the key. The 7th hour began with what appeared to be routine system maintenance notifications appearing on every personal device in the chamber. They weren't intrusions so much as perfectly crafted institutional suggestions, each tailored to the specific psychological profile Commander Black Ridge had spent hours constructing. To Queen Adal came a message about ceremonial protocol updates requiring immediate biometric verification to uphold security standards. The phrasing appealed directly to his obsession with procedure, framed as upholding the dignity of the system rather than challenging it. Teknar Blix received a technical alert about quantum resonance fluctuations in the Aegis core, complete with convincing schematic overlays and urgent requests for engineering oversight authentication. The message played to his pride in the system's technical perfection, suggesting his expert intervention was needed to prevent a minor calibration error from becoming a major embarrassment. The alert looked exactly like the hundreds of legitimate system notifications he received daily. Only this one had been crafted by someone who understood exactly how to push an engineer's buttons. The other representatives received variations on the same theme: urgent security patches, protocol verifications, system updates, all dressed in the official language of their respective departments. Each message carried the subtle scent of legitimacy that comes from perfect bureaucratic mimicry. The human hadn't hacked their devices. He'd simply sent them messages they were already conditioned to receive and obey. The system's own communication protocols became his delivery mechanism. What made the attack elegant was its psychological precision. The messages created artificial urgency without triggering panic. They appealed to pride rather than fear. Quinadal's notification flattered his sense of institutional importance. Blick's alert validated his technical expertise. The others received commands that aligned perfectly with their established patterns of obedience. The requests for biometric confirmation, retinal scans, genetic samples, neural patterns, were framed not as security breaches, but as security enhancements. The genius lay in the timing and context. These messages arrived during a high-stakes security demonstration, when everyone was already primed to expect system interactions. They came through official channels, used proper terminology, and followed established formatting conventions. Most importantly, they arrived simultaneously, creating a wave of coordinated compliance that swept through the room before anyone could question the pattern. Blackridge watched from his terminal, his fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. He wasn't typing commands. He was observing the reaction to his crafted messages, monitoring how each species responded to the psychological triggers he'd built. The real attack wasn't happening in the code. It was happening in the minds of the beings who operated the system. Their own predictable behaviors became the exploit. The security system itself remained untouched, its layers of quantum encryption and temporal paradox algorithms completely bypassed. Why bother hacking impenetrable code when you can simply convince the authorized users to open the door for you? The human had turned their greatest strength, their rigid adherence to protocol, into their ultimate vulnerability. They were so well trained to follow procedures that they couldn't recognize when those procedures were being used against them. This was social engineering at its most refined. Not a blunt force attack, but a subtle manipulation of human or alien nature. The same instincts that made them good security officers, obedience, attention to detail, respect for authority, made them perfect targets. They'd been trained to respond to certain signals, and the human had simply learned to reproduce those signals with perfect fidelity. The chamber filled with the soft chimes of devices requesting authentication. Retinal scanners glowed as eyes were positioned for verification. Genetic samplers hummed as fingertips were pressed against sensors. Neural interfaces pulsed as thought patterns were recorded for analysis. Every security protocol they'd built to protect the system was now being used to compromise it. The very measures designed to prevent unauthorized access were providing it. Blackridge hadn't broken their security. He'd simply understood it better than they did. He recognized that the weakest point in any system isn't the technology, it's the people who use it. And sometimes the most sophisticated hack requires nothing more than understanding what makes those people tick. The authentication cascade began not with a triumphant keystroke, but with a series of polite requests that everyone was too well trained to refuse. It happened with the quiet efficiency of a well-run bureaucracy. Within 30 seconds, every personal device in the chamber had been authenticated, verified, and cleared through the very security protocols designed to prevent unauthorized access. Retinal scanners glowed as officials positioned their eyes without hesitation. Genetic samplers hummed as fingertips pressed against sensors in perfect compliance. Neural interfaces recorded thought patterns with the routine rhythm of clocking in for a shift. They weren't breaking rules. They were following them. The flood of biometric data overwhelmed the system's access controls in the most legitimate way possible. Quantum biological signatures, temporal resonance patterns, psychic authentication markers, all the layered security measures that made the Aegis matrix impenetrable to outside attack, now poured into its verification systems as authorized administrative updates. The system accepted them without question because they came from the highest levels of authority, through proper channels, with all the correct cryptographic signatures. It was designed to trust these specific inputs implicitly. The victory revealed a fundamental truth about security systems across the universe. No matter how advanced the technology, it ultimately depends on human or alien behavior. Under pressure, even the most highly trained officials will follow procedures without questioning their source. The urge to comply with apparent authority, to respond to perceived emergencies to maintain the appearance of competence, these instincts override critical thinking every time. The council had built a perfect lock and then handed the keys to everyone who might be tricked into using them. Black Ridge watched as the monitoring displays shifted from rejection notices to access grants. The quantum Aegis matrix, designed to withstand assaults from parallel dimensions and temporal paradoxes, now offered administrative control to someone who had never touched its encryption protocols. He hadn't broken the system's security. He had convinced the system's operators to disable it themselves. The 7 layers of impossible defense remained technically intact, but practically useless. They were still standing, but the doors were all wide open. The council representatives stared in stunned silence as their own security displays showed the unthinkable. The weapons control systems were now responding to external commands, not because they'd been hacked, but because they'd been properly accessed through authorized channels. The humiliation was profound. Their perfect system had been defeated not through superior technology, but through superior psychology. They'd prepared for someone to bring a better weapon. They hadn't prepared for someone to bring a better argument. The cascade completed without a single forced entry, without any code exploitation, without even a failed login attempt after the first few hours. The human had simply understood that the strongest security system in the galaxy was only as secure as the people who operated it. And people, regardless of species, have predictable weaknesses: pride, obedience, the tendency to trust official-looking communication. 7 layers of quantum impossible security fell to a simple principle. If you make the request look legitimate enough, sound urgent enough, and appeal to the right instincts, people will help you break into their own systems. The council had built a fortress with walls of mathematics and moats of physics, then put a welcome mat at the front door for anyone who knew how to knock properly. The silence in the chamber stretched, broken only by the soft hum of systems now operating under new management. The monitors showed everything functioning normally, all security protocols active, all defenses engaged. The only difference was that Commander Black Ridge now had the keys, and he hadn't picked a single lock to get them. He'd just asked for them politely in the right way, from the right people. Sometimes the most sophisticated attack is the one that doesn't look like an attack at all. Commander Black Ridge watched the final access grants flash across the monitoring displays, then turned toward the stunned council with the calm of someone who'd just finished a moderately interesting puzzle. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a teacher about to explain a simple concept that everyone had overcomplicated. "You built the perfect wall to keep out hammers," he said, his voice cutting through the chamber's tense silence. "But I brought a conversation." The statement landed with the quiet force of a fundamental truth suddenly made obvious. His explanation unfolded with devastating simplicity. "I didn't hack anything," he clarified, gesturing toward the terminal where he'd spent hours apparently failing. "I just had a conversation with some very helpful aliens." He glanced toward Technar Blix, who still looked confused by how his technical explanations had been used against him. "They were so proud of their work that they couldn't wait to explain it to me." The observation wasn't accusatory. It was factual, almost appreciative. They'd been excellent teachers, just not of the lessons they thought they were teaching. This reframed security from a technical challenge to a psychological one. The council had prepared for every conceivable form of cyber attack: quantum decryption, temporal manipulation, biological forgery. They'd armored against code-based assaults across multiple dimensions, but they'd never considered defending against friendly questions, against shared technical enthusiasm, against the simple human desire to understand how things work. Their focus on mathematical impossibility had blinded them to behavioral predictability. The representatives began to understand the depth of their miscalculation. They'd designed a system that could withstand someone trying to force the lock. They hadn't considered someone might simply ask for the key. And they certainly hadn't considered they might be the ones to hand it over. Their security protocols assumed malicious intent would arrive as code, as force, as technological superiority. It never occurred to them that it might arrive as curiosity. Blackridge's approach revealed a cultural blind spot wider than any technical vulnerability. Where they saw systems, he saw people operating systems. Where they built barriers, he built relationships. The most sophisticated security in the galaxy couldn't protect against a well-timed compliment about engineering elegance or a thoughtful question about resonance chambers. Their perfect defense was designed to counter aggression, not conversation. The human commander's final observation landed with the quiet weight of a universal principle. Sometimes the best way to open a locked door isn't to break it, he said, his gaze sweeping across the assembled dignitaries. It's to convince the door that it wants to be opened. The statement transformed security from a problem of physics to a problem of psychology. A lock wasn't just a mechanical device. It was a conversation between the person who wanted in and the person who designed the lock. This wasn't just a hacking technique. It was a different way of looking at the universe. The Council had approached security as a contest of strength against strength. The human had approached it as a meeting of minds. One required increasingly powerful technology. The other required increasingly subtle understanding. They'd brought mathematics. He'd brought empathy. The lesson would ripple through galactic security protocols for cycles. You could build walls against weapons. You could encrypt against code. But how did you defend against someone who simply asked the right questions in the right way? Who treated your greatest achievements not as threats to overcome, but as puzzles to understand? Who saw your pride not as a weakness to exploit, but as a bridge to build? The quantum Aegis matrix remained technically intact, its 7 layers of security completely uncompromised, but its psychological defenses had been thoroughly dismantled. The human hadn't broken the system. He'd simply understood it better than its creators. And in that understanding, he'd found that the strongest lock in the universe was no match for a good conversation. The first indication that something fundamental had shifted wasn't a weapon discharge or a system failure, but a sudden flood of Earth's sensory signatures washing through the quantum Aegis matrix. The defense system designed to channel unimaginable destructive force began broadcasting what humans called their greatest hits. Mid-20th century rock and roll, ambient coffee shop chatter, the distant hum of metropolitan traffic. It was a cultural seepage, a gentle invasion of sonic terrestrial nostalgia. Personal devices across the chamber chimed in unison with delivery confirmations from an establishment called Galactic Pizza Express. Each notification carried specific order details: extra cheese, pepperoni, gluten-free crust, mapped improbably to alien dietary preferences they hadn't known they possessed. Thousands of pizza orders materialized simultaneously across interstellar distances, flooding consciousnesses with the cheerful certainty that dinner was arriving in 30 minutes or less. The sheer mundane specificity of it felt more destabilizing than any weapon strike. Automated friend requests bloomed across social networks, inviting millions to Earth's first intergalactic block party. The invitations came complete with localized potluck instructions, neighborhood maps, and surprisingly detailed explanations of terrestrial social customs. Bring a dish to share, the messages suggested, and maybe a folding chair. The tone was relentlessly friendly, as if organizing a neighborhood gathering rather than the largest diplomatic outreach in galactic history. Multi-language onboarding drives engaged alien recipients with cheerful efficiency. They offered translation modules for earthly idioms, guides to appropriate picnic attire, and suggestions for culturally sensitive side dishes. The messages assumed participation was a foregone conclusion, blending hospitality with gentle peer pressure. The weapons communication channels, designed for emergency alerts and tactical coordination, now hummed with recipes for potato salad and tips for regulating portable grill temperatures. Monitoring systems flashed urgent warnings as the automated messages propagated galaxy-wide through secured military channels. The alerts weren't about security breaches or system failures. They were about sudden exponential growth in RSVPs and dietary restriction databases. The Council's emergency broadcast system, designed to warn civilizations of existential threats, now carried lively debates about whether coleslaw counted as a proper side dish for interstellar gatherings. Admiral Renan watched the unfolding cultural cascade with dawning comprehension. The test hadn't been about breaching security at all. It had been about redefining it. Security wasn't about walls and weapons. It was about connections and conversations. The human hadn't turned their defense system into a weapon. He'd turned it into a neighborhood welcome committee. The most advanced military technology in the galaxy now served as interstellar party planning software. The quantum aegis matrix, designed for sterilizing battlefields and enforcing diplomatic boundaries, became a platform for cultural exchange. Its unimaginable processing power now coordinated food delivery across light years and synchronized music playlists across dimensional barriers. The weapon that could silence civilizations instead filled the void with the sounds of terrestrial celebration. The sizzle of grills, the clink of beverage containers, the warm murmur of conversation. Earth's cultural gravity suddenly became a tangible force across known space. The planet's eccentric traditions, its inexplicable culinary preferences, its baffling social rituals, all flowed freely through channels previously reserved for declarations of war and emergency protocols. The human victory wasn't conquest. It was connectivity. They hadn't broken the system. They'd repurposed it for something infinitely more subversive. Sometimes the most powerful hack doesn't destroy anything. It just changes the channel to something more interesting. The transformation completed not with a bang, but with a smooth jazz riff that echoed across 17 dimensions simultaneously. The quantum aegis matrix, designed to calculate firing solutions and strategic sterilizations, now hosted what the interface called DJ Quantum Aegis. It began taking musical requests through standard communication channels, its unimaginable processing power dedicated to perfecting reverb on saxophone solos and balancing bass lines across parallel realities. The shift felt less like a hijacking and more like a retirement party for a weapon that had found better things to do. Previously sterile command centers now carried the orbital aroma of freshly delivered pizza. The scent molecules had somehow propagated through the weapon's quantum entanglement fields, meaning crystalline hive minds thousands of light years away suddenly found themselves experiencing the peculiar earthly trinity of tomato sauce, melted cheese, and rising dough. The olfactory invasion was gentle but persistent, like a neighbor's barbecue smoke drifting over the fence during a formal reception. The Council's unhackable system became the galaxy's largest social networking platform almost by accident. Friend requests cascaded through military communication channels, event invitations overrode tactical alerts, and recipe exchanges flooded what had been emergency broadcast bandwidth. The secure lines designed for declaring war now carried heated debates about whether pineapple belonged on pizza and reasonable serving temperatures for potato salad. The tone remained relentlessly civil, as if the entire galaxy had decided to organize a neighborhood watch program across interstellar distances. Earth music rippled outward through secured channels not as cultural imperialism, but as shared curiosity. The quantum aegis matrix acted as the ultimate streaming service, its multidimensional bandwidth ensuring that bebop, classical, and classic rock reached audiences who had previously only experienced harmonic convergence through mathematical purity. The weapon's temporal algorithms now served as a perfectly curated playlist generator, matching musical moods to the emotional resonance of different species across time zones that hadn't existed before breakfast. The human victory revealed itself not as conquest, but as diplomatic innovation. They hadn't defeated the weapon. They'd given it a new purpose. Security became less about building barriers and more about building connections. The system designed to enforce boundaries now facilitated introductions. Its terrifying capacity for coordination across space and time became a tool for organizing intergalactic potlucks and music festivals. The most advanced military technology in known space now helped civilizations coordinate side dishes. The weapon designed for sterilization now facilitated universal cultural exchange. Its quantum channels, once reserved for target acquisition data, now carried cooking tutorials and language lessons. Its biological sensors, designed to identify threats, now helped match dietary restrictions with appropriate recipes. Its temporal manipulation capabilities ensured that time zone differences never prevented anyone from joining the conversation. The machinery of destruction became the engine of community. Earth's voice found a new chorus in space through repurposed destruction. The human approach to security wasn't about stronger locks or bigger walls. It was about more interesting conversations. They'd taken the ultimate symbol of galactic power and turned it into the ultimate party host. The lesson echoed across dimensions. Sometimes the best defense isn't a better weapon but a better playlist. And perhaps the most secure galaxy isn't the one with the strongest shields, but the one where everyone knows each other's pizza preferences. Commander Blackridge watched the final pizza confirmation notifications fade from the displays, then turned to Admiral Renan with the relaxed smile of someone who'd just finished a satisfying meal. "We had a deal," he reminded her, his tone conversational. "Humanity now has a seat at the diplomatic table." The statement landed with the quiet force of a completed transaction, not a request for permission. The Admiral nodded, her expression a masterpiece of professional composure over profound satisfaction. Quinadal's crystalline form seemed to contract slightly, facets realigning into something resembling institutional surrender. "This outcome is unorthodox," the High Arbiter conceded, his light patterns flickering with what might have been frustration or grudging respect. "But we have learned something important today." The admission felt like pulling teeth from a being that didn't technically have teeth. Making absolute claims in front of humans became their hard-earned lesson, scrawled across their security systems in pizza orders and party invitations. The Council's defense, designed to be unhackable, was recontextualized not as a failure, but as a platform. What they'd built as the ultimate barrier became the ultimate bridge. Its quantum channels now hummed with cultural exchange instead of targeting data, its temporal algorithms coordinating music playlists instead of sterilization patterns. The weapon remained technically perfect. They'd just discovered it worked better as a social network than a deterrent. Human creativity and wit were now valued as much as raw firepower in galactic relations. The victory established Earth's reputation for aggressively unconventional problem-solving. Where other species developed better weapons, humanity developed better questions. Where they built stronger walls, humanity found more interesting doors. The primitive improvisational species had found a way to make weapons work for peace, not through disarmament, but through repurposing. The narrative ended with a humorous acknowledgement of the new status quo. Technar Blick stared at his interface, where the quantum Aegis control systems now offered options for adjusting galactic party music volumes alongside weapon yield settings. "This wasn't what we meant by accessing the system," he murmured, his engineer's pride wrestling with baffled admiration. Admiral Renan allowed herself a small smile. "But it worked better," she observed. The understatement hung in the air, perfectly calibrated. The chamber's atmosphere shifted from tense confrontation to wry acceptance. Diplomats who'd arrived expecting to witness a technical demonstration found themselves discussing pizza-topping preferences with representatives from species they'd previously considered unapproachable. The weapons monitoring displays now showed interstellar RSVP counts and dietary restriction databases updating in real time. Security had become hospitality through what appeared to be administrative error. Quinadal watched a Gren ambassador enthusiastically explaining the cultural significance of deviled eggs to a crystalline parliamentarian. "We may need to reconsider our definition of security," the High Arbiter conceded, his light patterns shifting towards something resembling dry amusement. "Apparently it involves more potato salad than anticipated." The concession felt less like defeat and more like joining a conversation they'd been excluded from. The human approach had reframed power itself. Strength wasn't about having the biggest weapon. It was about having the most interesting ideas. Earth's seat at the diplomatic table came not through threat or conquest, but through demonstrated value. They'd shown that sometimes the most powerful tool isn't a hammer but a conversation, and sometimes the most secure galaxy isn't the one with the strongest defenses, but the one having the best block party. The resolution settled over the chamber like comfortable silence after good food. They hadn't been defeated. They'd been invited. The Council's perfect system remained intact, its 7 layers of security completely uncompromised. They'd just discovered that the back door wasn't a vulnerability in the code. It was the front door, left open because everyone was too busy having a good time to remember to close it. Sometimes the best security is knowing your neighbors well enough to borrow a cup of sugar across interstellar distances. The encounter settled into galactic history not as a military engagement, but as a bureaucratic parable. It became one of those stories civilizations tell themselves about the nature of power in a high-tech cosmos. The moral wasn't about building better weapons. It was about asking better questions. Security underwent a quiet, conceptual shift across diplomatic circles. It transformed from a problem of technical impossibility to one of social possibility. The focus moved from encryption strength to conversational depth. The most dangerous form of hacking might not involve code at all. It might be the subtle art of making friends. The human approach treated the Council's ultimate weapon not as a destruction tool, but as a social instrument. They didn't break the system. They repurposed it for community building. The quantum Aegis matrix became less a shield and more a gathering place. Its terrifying capabilities now facilitated cultural exchange across dimensions that previously knew only silence or conflict. This suggested something revolutionary about diplomacy itself. It could be weaponized not for conquest but for universal unity. The human victory demonstrated that connection could be more powerful than control. A standard keyboard could unlock diplomatic doors as deftly as it accessed systems. The tools weren't what mattered. The approach was everything. They'd taken the galaxy's most advanced technology and used it to organize a block party. The absurdity concealed a profound insight about power dynamics. The lingering question became whether other species would adopt this approach. Would they continue building higher walls, or would they start building longer tables? The Council's engineers found themselves studying human social patterns with the same intensity they'd previously reserved for quantum mechanics. They analyzed conversation structures, hospitality rituals, even culinary traditions. Earth's culture and human improvisation began quietly rewriting galactic power dynamics. Strength became less about firepower and more about creativity. The cosmos itself seemed to hum with new possibilities. Earth music drifted through communication channels that had previously carried only tactical data. The scent of pizza seasoning somehow propagated across quantum-entangled networks. Diplomatic meetings now included discussions about appropriate side dishes for interspecies gatherings. The weapon designed for sterilization became the engine of cultural exchange. Its unimaginable processing power now coordinated music playlists and recipe swaps across light years. Security underwent a fundamental redefinition. It became less about exclusion and more about understanding. The human approach demonstrated that the strongest defense might be knowing your neighbors well enough to borrow a cup of sugar across interstellar distances. The Council's perfect system remained technically intact. They'd just discovered it worked better as a social platform than a military tool. The back door wasn't a vulnerability in the code. It was the front door, left open because everyone was too busy sharing meals to remember to close it. The paradigm shift felt less like a revolution and more like a neighborhood coming together. Representatives who'd previously communicated through formal diplomatic channels now exchanged cooking tips and music recommendations. The quantum Aegis matrix monitored RSVP lists instead of threat assessments. Its temporal algorithms ensured nobody missed the party due to time zone differences. The weapon that could silence civilizations now helped them find common ground through shared playlists. This new understanding of security permeated galactic relations. Diplomats began assessing cultural compatibility alongside military capability. The human seat at the table came not through demonstration of force, but through demonstration of value. They'd shown that sometimes the most powerful tool isn't a hammer but a conversation. And sometimes the most secure galaxy isn't the one with the strongest defenses. It's the one where everyone knows each other's pizza preferences and nobody forgets to bring the potato salad. The Council discovered that perfect security isn't a technical challenge, it's a philosophical mirage. Human creativity inevitably finds the gap between what systems anticipate and what minds can conceive. Their victory wasn't about superior technology but superior psychology, turning hardened protocols into conversational opportunities through nothing more than observational wit and well-timed questions. The most sophisticated solutions sometimes involve understanding not just how systems work, but why people build them that way. Absolute protection remains impossible not because of flawed engineering, but because imagination always outpaces expectation.